You're listening to The Vault. I'm Trisha Taurinskas, and this is part 2 of Tracy Briggs' series on Walter Liggett. He was a former editor targeted by the mob. If you haven't listened to Tracy's first story on this, I'd recommend you do that. You can find it in the Vault feed. Now, here's Tracy.
Crusading journalist Walter Liggett was shot dead while holding a bag of groceries. In part 2 of The Slaying of Walter Liggett, why a Minnesota governor and a former North Dakota governor are players in the tragedy. Walter and Edith Liggett were probably looking forward to that Christmas season of 1935. After all, they had been through a heck of a year, all at the hands of his enemies. He had a few of them, enemies. It was just part of the job. As a muckraking journalist who wrote for papers from Alaska to Fargo, North Dakota to New York City, he didn't pull any punches when he saw what he thought was corruption and wrongdoing. He was a Minnesota native, born on a farm in Benson, Minnesota. He had come back home in 1933 to run a small crusading paper called the Midwest American. He did so with his wife Edith, who was also a writer. Since his printing presses first started rolling in Minneapolis, the man at the center of Liggett's journalistic attacks was Minnesota Governor Floyd Olson, who Liggett claimed was notoriously immoral and in cahoots with mobsters, including North Minneapolis bootlegging kingpin Isidore Kid Can Blumenfeld. Despite being a one-time ally of Olson's in the Farmer Labor Party, Liggett now claimed organized crime had infiltrated the governor's office, creating and fostering widespread corruption throughout the state. In less than 2 years, and dozens, if not hundreds, of Olson-Blumenfeld stories, Liggett went through enough ink to rival the water in a small Minnesota lake. Liggett was relentless in his attacks, and by the fall of 35, it appeared he was paying dearly for it. Although no one was ever charged, it's believed Blumenfeld's mob thugs beat Liggett within an inch of his life, right as he was to go on trial for statutory rape charges, believed to have been cooked up by Olson's political cronies. In November, the still bruised and beaten Liggett was eventually found not guilty on the trumped-up charges, which involved a couple of teenage girls. One newspaper said the trial was a brazen use of political power to silence a free editor, and the charge itself a palpable frame-up from its start. Again, a pretty bad stretch for the family heading into Christmas. That's why that Monday night, December 9th, probably seemed like a nice break. At the time, Liggett's daughter, Marta Liggett Woodbury, was just 10 years old. In her 1998 book, Stopping the Presses, The Murder of Walter W. Liggett, she recalled her father was in a relaxed and smiling mood when he picked her up from the library around 5 o'clock. From there, the family ran a few more errands, including a stop at the grocery store. Woodbury said it was about 5:45 as they drove to their apartment building at 1825 2nd Avenue South in Minneapolis. She noticed an almost navy sky, a full moon rising, and a suspicious car nearby. She recalled, "As soon as we parked, I noticed a dark car turn purposefully down the alley toward us. Somehow it seemed ominous, even as it turned." Walter had already gotten out of the car and had grabbed the grocery bag. But upon seeing the car coming down the narrow alley, he motioned for his wife and daughter to stay in the car as he moved close to the front fender to allow the car to pass. But instead, the car sped up, and then all hell broke loose. Here's how Liggett's daughter remembered it. "Suddenly I saw a hand with a gun at the window of the moving car. I ducked without thinking and heard 5 quick shots at the same time. When I looked up, my mother was half outside the car and my father was laying in the alley. I remember yelling, 'They killed Daddy!'" She said the gunman must have been an expert, as the 5 bullets from the Tommy submachine gun had formed a crescent shape around her father's heart. The coroner said he died instantly. He was 49 years old. It was a blur from then on. Woodbury recalls the reporters and police officers who descended upon the family that night, quote, represented the dregs of their profession, indifferent, impervious to our loss, laughing, cursing, and smoking smelly cigars and cigarettes, end quote. Despite their unseemly behavior, the police worked fairly quickly to arrest a suspect, thanks to Liggett's wife, Edith, who claimed at the scene she knew exactly who killed her husband. She said she'd remember the grin on his face for the rest of her life. It was Isidore Kid Can Blumenfeld, the state's most powerful gangster. 12 days after the shooting on December 21st, Blumenfeld was indicted for the murder of Walter Liggett. From the start, the mob boss proclaimed his innocence and said he had an airtight alibi. He was getting a haircut and a shoe shine at a barbershop on Hennepin Avenue when the murder happened. Not surprising that employees and customers who were in the shop at the time, and maybe even a few who weren't, backed up Blumenfeld's story. At the trial, Blumenfeld's attorneys attacked the state's star witness, Edith Liggett, who, with her doe eyes and thin, small frame, appeared almost childlike as she testified. The defense keyed in on a phone call overheard that night of the death when Edith was on the phone with her mother. She apparently was overheard saying, "Governor Olson's gang got Walter, Mother." Blumenfeld's attorneys argued if she told her mother the governor was the guilty party, then why was she pointing fingers at their client? Not to mention, they said, it was way too dark in the alley that night for Edith to have identified anyone. But Edith countered, said that it was Blumenfeld's smiling face she saw pull the trigger. But the governor was behind it. After a year of enduring attacks in the press from them, he had to be the brains behind the crime. She testified the murder would not have been committed without Governor Olson's permission. His gang either ordered it or permitted it. For his part, Governor Olson said he wouldn't address the stories that had been written about him by the Liggetts, but that he fully supported the legal system to find and convict the murderers. After closing arguments, the jury took just 90 minutes to issue a verdict of not guilty. As the verdict was read, Blumenfeld's friends cheered while Edith Liggett sobbed. Blumenfeld jumped up and shook the hands of the male jurors and kissed the hands of the female jurors. Over the years, some people have theorized that while Minnesota Governor Floyd Olson was a possible suspect in the case, a former North Dakota governor might have also been a player in the drama. Woodbury mentioned in her book that the morning he was killed, her father was talking to former North Dakota Governor Bill Langer on the phone. Langer was a former NPL colleague of Liggett's, and he had recently been accused of extorting campaign contributions. His trial was starting soon, and Liggett was expected to be the star witness for Langer. Langer had also recently suggested that Liggett move the paper, the Midwest American, to Bismarck and continue his muckraking work there. Woodbury said in the book that conversation had led some to believe the murder of her father had everything to do with Langer and North Dakota. Some theories suggest a political enemy of Langer's wanted to keep Liggett from testifying. Others suggested the scheme was hatched by a group of farmer laborites who wanted to buy the Midwest American and turn the discourse back in their favor. After realizing Liggett would never agree to be bought out, the decision was made to kill him. However, none of the theories were ever definitively proven, and Liggett's murder remains officially unsolved. So whatever happened to some of the key players in the story? Governor Floyd Olson. Well, unbeknownst to almost everyone, the same month that Liggett was shot, Olson was diagnosed with stomach cancer. His health declined quickly. He died in August of 1936 at the age of 44. After being acquitted of the Liggett murder, Isidore Kid Can Blumenfeld was convicted in both 1959 and 1961 and imprisoned on charges involving prostitution and gambling. He was released from prison in 1964 and continued amassing a fortune, splitting time between homes in Minnesota and Miami. Strangely enough, in 1978, Blumenfeld and his brothers were allegedly responsible for manipulating Magic Marker's stock prices. He died of heart disease in 1981 with a fortune of $10 million. Edith Liggett left Minneapolis 4 months after Blumenfeld's acquittal, disappointed, she said, in the corruption in the Twin Cities and worried about her family's safety. She said, "I fear for my life and for my children. Already an attempt has been made to kill me." She died in California in 1972. Liggett's daughter, Marta Liggett Woodbury, earned degrees at Bard College and Columbia University. She worked as a librarian, researcher, and journalist in the San Francisco Bay Area. She spent 10 years researching the book on her father. She died in 2008, 10 years after it was published.